that was an internal document written by a former Post Office Managing Director, Dave Smith, who interestingly is due to give evidence on Thursday. Alan Bates also said it was pretty obvious the Post Office were after me one way or another. He described the organisation as atrocious, beyond saving, suggesting it needs to be sold to Amazon. And you mentioned, Johnny, that he described Post Office bosses as thugs in suits. That was in a letter replying to Sir Ed Davey, who was a Post Office minister from 2010 to 2012. A meeting, by the way, that he did eventually have with him, and he said nothing positive came from it. The Lib Dems, by the way, point out that Sir Ed has said sorry, and the Post Office are to blame, accusing officials there of lying. Alan Bates also mentioned compensation. He said he received a derisory offer after putting in a claim in October last year.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. Paul Hawkins there at the Post Office.
16 minutes past 6, a survey by the financial regulator suggests that more than 7 million adults are struggling to pay their shop rent. That and indeed the rest of the business information.
Morning, Justin. Yeah, that same survey last year from the Financial Conduct Authority suggested more than 10 million people were struggling then. So right across the country, perhaps some improvement, but no surprise. Spoken to different lenders, campaign groups in different parts of the country. The picture can appear very different, as this survey shows. Sheldon Mills is the Executive Director of Consumers and Competition at the Financial Conduct Authority. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Why the overall improvement, and what are the disparities when you dig a bit deeper?
So we found that while things have improved since last year, people are still struggling with the cost of living crisis. Over 7 million people are struggling to pay bills and credit repayments, and that's down from nearly 11 million last year. When you dig into things, you see certain groups struggling more than others. So renters are struggling considerably more than average, but they're prioritising their rental payments. Mortgage holders are obviously keeping up with their mortgage payments most, but a lot are contacting lenders for help. And we're seeing some groups, such as low-income households, households particularly in the north of England, who are struggling slightly more than others.
But I just wonder, clearly your survey implies that far fewer people are struggling. So where are those improvements being made, and what, for example, why is that not happening in the northeast of England?
Yeah, so I can't comment on why in particular regions that we haven't seen the same improvements. But what you will see is we have seen the cost of inflation come down, and that is starting to impact and help support people. We have seen wage rises for some people, and to be honest, what we do see in our survey that people are tightening their belts. They're seeking to manage their money, and they're getting out to lenders and charities to get help and support in advance of struggling to actually make credit repayments.
One area that would help people's budgets, if they're able to save, is to be able to get a better return and to take advantage of this era of higher interest rates that we're in now. You've had new powers last year to monitor if banks are actually passing on these higher interest rates. Couldn't you be acting more quickly to make sure more of them are towing the line?
Well, we've worked closely with the banks and the industry to ensure that they're both making sure what's available to customers in terms of savings is clear, so they're contacting customers in terms of savings. So if you use your mobile app, you should see offers in relation to savings. We've encouraged firms, we have a campaign out there for firms to help people to switch and for consumers to switch savings rates. And we do see that competition in savings rates is really driving higher rates in the system.
Do you not think that maybe there should be more in the system that just enables people with savings to just automatically be falling onto higher interest rates? Because a lot of people who are borrowing will feel like if they're not on top of it, they're going to be charged more, but yet they're the ones that have to be on top of getting a higher rate for their cash.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, what we tend to promote is that consumers take advantage of the competition and the offers of both savings rates and mortgage rates which are out there, rather than firms putting people onto the best available rate. That said, what we have asked firms to do is ensure that they are looking out for customers who are on poor value products for them, so people who have been on the same old or closed savings rate for a period of time, that firms should be reaching out to them and making sure they understand the offers which are available to them.
Are these firms doing enough? Have you message for them right now when you still see 7 million people across the country struggling with their income, struggling to pay bills?
So we have seen lenders step up and support people with help with managing their money, proactively reaching out to firms. But there is more that firms can do, and we strengthen protections for borrowers today in terms of ensuring that when borrowers do get into difficulty, that they help them with forbearance and meeting those debt commitments.
Sheldon Mills, Executive Director at the Financial Conduct Authority, thank you very much. If you were Taylor Swift fan, Bruce Springsteen, Stevie Nicks, who won't come into the UK as part of their global tours, but if you were after a ticket at this point, you don't even have to go through a resale site where prices can be hundreds of pounds more. The Labour Party wants to cap those resale prices if it wins the next general election. The ticket resale site, Viagogo, says that that risks creating a black market for fans. And I've got Chris Miller with me, who's the global managing director there. Chris, morning to you. Hello, Chris, and do we have you? James Sidney, investment director at Rathbones Investment Management. I'm not going to ask you about Taylor Swift, Jane. There's plenty of other things for me to talk about this morning as well. One of which is the pay of the chief executive of the drugs giant AstraZeneca. Now, £18.7 million is the pay deal that the business would like shareholders to approve, and headlines being made this morning because one of those top 20 shareholders says, well, Pascal Soriot is underpaid, massively underpaid, as it is. Would you agree?
It's amazing, isn't it? It's a phenomenal number. I think this is all about the differences in the way that chief executives are paid as between the United States and Europe. The larger healthcare companies in the US, that their CEOs are paid quite a bit more than they are in Europe. So, for example, just to draw a contrast, Novo Nordisk, which is the largest pharmaceuticals company in Europe now, the chief executives are paid about £7.8 million, relative to figures of around 20 million or so in the United States. And the argument that the shareholder in the US is making is that Pascal Soriot has done a great job turning the business round over the last decade from a company that really had very little exciting drugs in its pipeline to one that really looks pretty good today. So the track record is the reason why, but it's the cultural differences that really stand out here.
How much do the former boss of Shell, Ben Van Beurden, saying that the oil company is massively undervalued. So Pascal Soriot massively underpaid, Shell massively undervalued. How serious is this for the UK?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's another big issue, and Shell is one of the biggest companies listed in London, and the gap in terms of the valuation, the price that Shell shares attract compared to their US counterpart, there is a big difference between the two, and there's no doubt, again, that cultural difference, but also the access to capital. It's easier in the United States. The perception of oil companies is also different in the United States to Europe. So that there are some big differences that are driving the difference or that gap.
Sure. Good to catch up. James Sidney, Investment Director at Rathbones Investment Management. I've got Chris Miller back, the Global Managing Director of the ticket resale site Viagogo. Morning, Chris.
Morning. How are you?
Good. Why would capping prices necessarily push people onto black markets any more than there are right now?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to understand is that price caps are well intentioned, but we at Viagogo have been operating in the United Kingdom since 2006 and have a long history of successful operation there with the free market. allowing for buyers and sellers to securely and safely transfer or resell their tickets, apologies. And the one way to think about it is, you have a fan of an event like, let's say it's Taylor Swift, or maybe it's even, a really popular football match over here. It's impossible to regulate out the demand of an event. Someone's really passionate about an event. They're going to have these sort of bucket list moments or things that are going to drive them to buy. And on the other side of that, there's...
It might be, sorry to interrupt you, it might be impossible to regulate out, as you say. But, speaking with the Fanfare Alliance, who have been big campaigners for a cap on prices here, they say that there's no actual evidence that just because you cap prices, you're going to see more of a black market elsewhere. So we might just keep having the same sort of touting that we see elsewhere if a site like yours had capped prices.
Yeah, that's simply untrue, and that's a a group that's sort of funded by the music industry to lobby against the service.
What evidence do you have for the reality?
The reality is in Australia. The Australia reality is one example where just recently only 2 Taylor Swift events that took place, there was over 260,000 fake tickets that were reported alone. And this again is an example of where there is a price cap in place and it's been in effect. Ireland passed a law recently, and over the year 2022 to 2023, the Bank Santander actually issued a warning about ticket scams and how they've gone on the rise over double over that course of the year.
At the same time, though, Chris, if we've continued to use Taylor Swift as an example, so why not carry on with that? A front row standing ticket in the original sale would have cost you £172, and you could only buy 4 tickets. You go on your website now, and you can buy 20 tickets, and the price £2,649 each. Is that really the best thing for customers and for the industry?
The price there is an advertised price, so think of it this way, which is that anything that's listed up on the site hasn't been sold by definition, and those prices in particular are rarely, if ever, sell. We think it's most important that buyers and ultimately fans have the choice over to make that purchase or not, and that we prioritize their protection most importantly. And I think that
surely is just encouraging people. There's somebody out there who thinks they can get rid of these tickets for that amount they're testing the water. They are looking to trade these tickets like a tout.
There are many sellers that will use other platforms that are unregulated, such as Facebook or Twitter or, back to the street. So we think, again, it's really important that we sort of put together a collaboration of the entire industry. Just looking at the secondary market, or just Viagogo for that matter, is not something that's going to be that effective. We've been regulated, highly regulated in the United Kingdom for the past 6 or 7 years now, and have been operating with total compliance. So again,
there's been prosecutions along the way, haven't there? But that regulation has been there. Chris, we're going to have to leave it there. Chris Miller, Viagogo's Global Managing Director.
Thanks very much, Sean. It is 28 minutes past 6, which means it is time for the Sport Report.
Good morning, Johnny. What an extraordinary Champions League quarter-final first leg in Madrid last night, with Manchester City scoring after 2 minutes, then going behind, then going in front again, with the match finally ending Real Madrid 3, Manchester City 3. Here's our senior football reporter and match commentator Ian Dennis.
Bernardo Silva's quick thinking caught Lunin out, a second-minute free kick for an early City goal, but Real Madrid responded and rattled in 2 goals in 3 minutes. Camavinga's deflected shot off Ruben Diaz. Rodrigo rolled in a second on the counter-attack, but in the second half, Foden lashed in a leveller. Gvardiol with a great goal to curl in a third. But after the introduction of Luka Modric, the home side came back yet again, and a wonderful equaliser from Valverde on the volley, right-footed, found the bottom left-hand corner. And on the evidence of this first leg, next week's return at the Etihad is one not to be missed.
True enough. Well, Arsenal versus Bayern Munich finished in a 2-2 draw, a similar pattern to Real versus Man City. Arsenal scoring first from Saka, then going 2-1 down, 2 goals from Gnabry and Kane, a penalty, before Arsenal equalised via Trossard. Here's Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta.
I think the team showed a lot of composure, especially after 2-1, because you can throw your toys away and generate a lot of spaces for the opponent and lose the tie.
Well, it remains tight at the top of the Championship. Leaders Leicester lost 1-0 at Millwall, but Leeds couldn't take advantage. They drew 0-0 at home to Sunderland and are 1 point behind Leicester in second place. Third place Ipswich will go top tonight if they beat Watford. Southampton stay fourth after beating Coventry 2-1, while Norwich conceded a 2-goal lead to draw 2-2 at Sheffield Wednesday and they stay 6th. Wins for all 4 home nations in their Women's European Championship qualifiers. England defeated the Republic of Ireland 2-0 in Dublin. Scotland beat Slovakia 1-0. Northern Ireland went to Bosnia-Herzegovina and won 3-1, but Wales registered the biggest score of the night, a 6-0 victory in Kosovo. To golf, and Rory McIlroy's 10th attempt to complete the career Grand Slam at the US Masters at Augusta will take place over the first 2 rounds at least, with the only man ranked higher than him in the world, that's Scotty Scheffler. They and Xander Schauffele will tee off tomorrow at 15:42 BST precisely, and it will be precise. Here's McIlroy.
I've got all the tools to do well this week. It's to bring those tools out. I think one of the most important things is to enjoy it and smell the, I guess not the roses, the azaleas along the way.
Here are the tips. Wolverhampton 340. Number 7, Cante Partito. Market raising 435. Number 6, Off the Jury.
Thank you very much.
Not even sure what language that is, to be honest with you.
It's very well pronounced.
This weekend, a history of a small disc which had a big impact.
It's become so ubiquitous that we hardly give it a thought.
It helped our ancestors invent new and better tools, and today it can be used to heal us.
It's really great for the scalp because that's a difficult place to stitch up.
This is the past, present and future of adhesive.
The ideal would be that you had a complete off-on glue. 1 minute it was absolutely stuck hard, and then you did one specific thing to it and it came apart.
Glued Up, the sticky story of humanity. With me, Mark Miodownik, on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds. Next Monday to Friday lunchtime at 1:45.
Summary of the news from Lisa Costa.
An independent inquiry has criticised services that NHS England used to offer to children questioning their gender identity. The report by Dr. Hilary Klaus says there's a lack of research and remarkably weak evidence on medical interventions, such as prescribing drugs to stop the onset of puberty. She also says the toxicity of the debate around gender means professionals have been afraid to openly discuss their views. NHS England says it's already making changes. President Biden has called on Israel to unilaterally declare a 6 to 8 week ceasefire in Gaza to allow deliveries of food and medicine. He also said the way the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was conducting the war was mistaken. The governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, has said yesterday was a dark day for her state after its Supreme Court revived a law from 160 years ago imposing an almost complete ban on abortion. Arizona is the 15th state where abortions have been largely outlawed since the federal right to a termination was removed 2 years ago. Assaulting a shop worker is to be made a separate criminal offence in England and Wales. Those found guilty will face a maximum sentence of 6 months in prison or an unlimited fine. The government has rejected a call to introduce graduated driving licences, preventing newly qualified drivers from driving at night for a period of time and limiting the number of passengers they can carry. The proposal came from 20 families who've lost relatives in road accidents. Researchers from King's College London say they've found a powerful sedative used to put cows and horses to sleep in some confiscated illegal cannabis vapes. The substance, called xylazine, also known as the zombie drug, can be lethal for humans. Britain's most successful gymnast, Max Whitlock, who's won 6 Olympic medals, 3 of them gold, says he'll retire after the Games in Paris this summer. He's hoping to end his career by becoming the first gymnast to win 4 consecutive medals on the same apparatus, in his case, the pommel horse.
Thank you. It is just come out to 25-7. President Biden has called on Israel to agree to a 6 to 8 week ceasefire in its war on Hamas in Gaza. It seems to be a pretty significant shift in tone. He was talking, President Biden, to a Spanish language TV network and talking about the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his approach to the war.
What I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country. I've spoken with everyone from the Saudis to the Jordanians to the Egyptians. They're prepared to move this food in, and I think there's no excuse to not provide for the medical and the food needs of those people. It should be done now.
Let's hear from Hugo Bashega, our correspondent in Jerusalem. And he's been critical of the Israeli government before, hasn't he, Hugo? But this does seem to be an upping of the tone.
Yeah, I think it does reflect just in the shift in tone of someone who has given unconditional support for Israel and growing frustration with the way Prime Minister Netanyahu is conducting this war. And I think in this interview, President Biden was essentially telling the Israelis, accept the deal, the ceasefire deal. And I guess a sign of this American pressure is the fact that the head of the CIA was sent to Cairo to be involved in this latest round of mediated talks. There's a lot of pressure on the Israelis to accept a deal. The Egyptians and the Qataris who are mediating these talks are putting a lot of pressure on Hamas to accept a deal. Now, the deal on the table involves the release of 40 hostages who are now being held in Gaza in return for 900 Palestinians who are being held in Israeli jails, and then there would be a 6-week ceasefire. But now we're waiting to hear from Hamas whether they're going to accept this proposal.
Why not all the hostages?
Well, what Hamas is saying is that they don't have all hostages. 130 hostages remain in Gaza. About 30 of them have been confirmed dead by the Israeli authorities. Hamas says that in all of them, they're not holding all of them. And I think also Hamas knows that, having the hostages puts them in a strong position to negotiate with the Israelis. And one Hamas official said this week that they fear that once the hostages are freed, the Israelis are going to return to Gaza to finish the job and try to destroy Hamas. And that's why they've been firm in their position that they want a permanent ceasefire, not a temporary ceasefire, which would mean the end of the war. So this has been one of the main obstacles in these negotiations.
Hugo Bashega in Jerusalem. Thank you.
The MP at the heart of the so-called Westminster honey trap scandal, William Wragg, the MP for Hazel Grove, has resigned the Conservative whip. He'll now sit as an independent MP, following his confession or admission last week that he handed over the personal details of colleagues and staff in Parliament because of concerns that photographs he had sent to someone on a dating app might be revealed. Meanwhile, there are reports overnight that the Foreign Secretary is rather struggling to see some of the people he wants to in Washington as he tries to rally support for Ukraine. Henry Zeffman is our chief political correspondent. He's at Millbank. Henry, William Wragg has quit a number of posts, hasn't he? Is this over as a result of this, and are we any clearer as to the intent behind what looks like blackmail?
No, is the short answer to that question. I mean, it's such a strange story, this. And before I go any further, I should just briefly declare my own interest, because the so-called honey trapper tried it on with me. Briefly and unsuccessfully. I've written about my experiences on the BBC website. I think in William Wragg's case, it felt inevitable that his position as a Conservative MP was going to come under severe strain after he admitted last Thursday that he had passed colleagues' numbers, MPs' numbers, onto somebody who he had met on a dating app, and that he was involved in all of this in some way. He's already standing down as an MP at the general election. That was announced some time ago. I think if we were in the middle of a parliamentary term, you'd now see his position as an MP at all coming under strain. But I think given a general election is taking place at some point this year, that probably isn't there. But the way that MPs think about this had changed. You initially had, after Will Wragg's first statement, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, praising his courage and admitting what happened to him publicly. But I think for some Conservative MPs, at least, that sympathy that they felt for a colleague, in some cases a friend, was beginning to kind of curdle into dismay at what he'd done, the security implications, the potential security implications of it, and also just no small amount of bemusement, because, to return to your question, we don't know what's going on here. We don't know who's behind all this. We don't know what their motive is. We don't know what they might have had on William Wragg. We don't know for what purpose they were trying to use it. There's a police investigation underway, lots of people desperate for answers.
And briefly, Henry, I don't know if you've had a chance to chase down this story that Lord Cameron tried to get to see the Speaker of the House of Representatives to lobby him about money for Ukraine, a man called Mike Johnson, but was unable to. Have you been able to firm that up?
Well, he said before he went to the US that he was going to be meeting Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he hasn't had a meeting with Mike Johnson. He's crucial to this because the UK is pressing the US to pass a $60 billion package of military aid for Ukraine, and in the US system, with all of its veto players, the House of Representatives really matters. Mike Johnson is not tabling a vote on that aid package for kind of unrelated reasons to do with his own fairly precarious political position within his party grouping. Look, it's crucial to the UK's foreign policy objectives for the UK to, for the UK to get the US to give that extra support to Ukraine. It's not happening so far, and David Cameron in Washington hasn't been able to have a meeting with one of the most important players.
Chief Political Correspondent Henry Zeffman, thank you very much.
20 to 7 is the time for most young people. A medical pathway will not be the best way to manage their gender-related distress. That is the central finding of the review into gender medicine for children in England, conducted by Dr. Hilary Cass, published today. Hugh Pym's our health editor. What else does she have to say, Hugh?
Well, Justin, it's a very interesting report from Dr. Hilary Cass. Just to give a reminder of the background to all this, her interim report was back in 2022 when she looked at, after being asked to carry out this inquiry by NHS England, looked at gender services for children and young people, particularly at the clinic at the Tavistock and Portman Trust in London, after a very sharp increase in referrals. And she concluded that the use of puberty blockers designed to stop the onset of puberty was not based on any real evidence or research, and she raised question marks over that. And last month, NHS England said routine use of puberty blockers would be stopped, and the Tavistock and Portman was closed for its gender service, with 2 new hubs being set up. So now we have this final report. And in her foreword, she says she wants to speak directly to children and young people affected by this, and she's saying they've been let down by a lack of real evidence on long-term outcomes with these form of treatments and therapies and medical pathways, and she's saying that they are not really the best for most young people. And she's saying that young people deserve the same standards of care as patients in other parts of the NHS. So it's a really, I think, significant report, and we'll have a very interesting range of reactions today, no doubt.
Well, which will be what? I mean, is anyone going to argue against it, do you think? Or is there now an acceptance that what happened at the Tavistock, at the Gender Identity Clinic, was wrong and shouldn't have happened, that the whistleblowers there were right? Or is anyone going to suggest that Dr. Cass is wrong?
Well, Stonewall, the campaigning charity, has said that the Cass Review does play a vital role in getting trans and gender diverse children the quality healthcare they deserve. Stonewall says it will put out a more detailed response. I think the interesting thing is there are other parts of her report on the types of changes that should be made in terms of what is made available, and that there should be different pathways for young children and their parents. There should be a different service for 17 to 25-year-olds,
she's also making
which
the
I think
point,
is all very
sorry to
important.
interrupt you, she's also making the point, we're going to hear from her at 7:30, she's also making the point that those who suggested these things in the past were bullied, effectively, into being quiet, and that is something we've got to face up to.
Yeah, she said the debate is highly toxic, with young people caught in the middle and clinical professionals afraid to discuss their views, and she said it's vitally important that the debate moves forward from this, with the types of care that young people and children with gender dysphoria deserve really being the priority now. So that is her call, that there is a move forward from this highly toxic debate, which she said really has stood in the way. And she said she personally has been criticised by both sides of the debate and has talked to a very wide range of people, and children included.
Hugh Pym, thank you.
It is 16 minutes to 7. Let's take a quick look at the papers. I'm looking at the front page of the Times, has a splendid story on it. If you're angry, put it in writing, but be sure to throw it away. It is from Rhys Blakely, their science correspondent, researchers in Japan deliberately annoyed volunteers by asking them to write brief opinions about social issues and then telling them their efforts were poor. The volunteers were then asked to spell out in writing their negative feelings. Those who were told to throw away what they'd written seemed to experience catharsis, always good, with their anger level quickly falling. By contrast, those who held onto the note remained upset. We expected that our method would suppress anger, said Nobuyuki Kawai of Nagoya University in Japan. However, we were amazed that anger was eliminated almost entirely. Do not press send, I think, is the motto on that one.
The gender story that we've just been talking about with Hugh Pym is the headline in most of the papers. The Guardian, thousands of children unsure of gender identity let down by the NHS. The Daily Mail, at last a voice of sanity on children and trans dogma. The Telegraph, NHS to review all trans treatment, the Telegraph says, because it is based on shaky foundations, according to the Cass report. And the Times, NHS review rejects the use of puberty blockers, no good evidence for giving transitioning drugs.
And that gender story is our main headline. A review of NHS gender identity services says children and young people have been adversely affected by the exceptionally toxic debate around the issue. Now, if you have a kidney transplant, there's a pretty good chance you will need a blood transfusion. Around 2 in every 5 transplant patients will need one. The problem, even when blood groups are matched for those transfusions, the antibodies produced in response to the transfusion can cause rejection. So step forward some very clever people at NHS Blood and Transplant who will, in a pilot study at a West London hospital, now double match blood. Not just by blood group, but by tissue type too. Dr. Colin Brown is head of the NHS Blood and Transplant's tissue typing laboratory at Colindale. Good morning, Dr. Brown.
Good morning, Johnny.
Can we start with the problem and then get to the solution? Have I got it right? It's about the reaction of the body to the transfusion or to the new kidney? Forgive me.
Yes. So it's to the transfusion.
Right.
So patients, some patients, renal patients, need a transfusion, and the white cells in that transfusion can stimulate the production of antibodies, which can preclude them from getting further transplants, but also damage the kidney if they have been transplanted already. So what we're trying to do now is match the red cell transfusions for the white cell types as well, the tissue types, and to avoid them getting sensitized against the transfusion and prolong and reduce the risk of kidney transplant rejection.
So that is a much more delicate or complex form of blood matching than simply going by blood group, is it?
Yes, so that's what we're trying it as a pilot at the Hammersmith Hospital, and just to see, just to gather more evidence and look at the logistics for a wider rollout to the rest of the UK.
What sort of numbers of people does this involve?
Well, the transplant waiting list was estimated to be about 7,000 last year, and they do about 3,500 transplants per year. So those are sort of numbers we're talking of. We need to obviously tissue type a lot of donors to be able to provide this service, and so we're always looking for people to join become blood donors and join the panel as well.
So you'll be looking at a certain amount of the blood that you are given through donation, and a certain proportion of that which is intended for kidney transplants, will get this sort of double test.
Yes, it will, yeah.
And you've got a pilot test, and how long will that take, and when will you know whether it's worth doing on a larger scale?
Okay, so the pilot's going to run for 6 months, and we'll be assessing the results halfway through the pilot, but also at the end of the pilot, to see if we've got enough donors that are tissue types, so we can provide this to all patients, but also we have the logistics to provide this in a timely manner.
Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
The time, 11 minutes to 7. There's a warning this morning about a particular kind of vape. Dr. Caroline Copeland is here in the studio, Senior Lecturer in Pharmacology and Toxicology at King's College London, Director as well of the National Programme on Substance Use Mortality. Good morning to you, Dr. Copeland.
Good morning.
It's not a legal vape, is it, or is it? I mean, it's available, but how easily?
So, yes, it's an illegal counterfeit vape, so it's not one that would be being legitimately sold.
Right, but what is it and where is it available?
So, counterfeit vapes are a type of street drug. You can buy tablets now, powders, and vapes have now been added to this list of things.
Right, and what is it that this vape particularly has that's so damaging?
So these vapes have been sold as containing THC, which is the major psychoactive ingredient in cannabis. But upon testing, they've actually been found to contain a different drug called xylazine, which is a strong sedative.
Right, and that does what to you?
So xylazine causes sedation, so in large amounts it can slow heart rate, slow breathing, and it can also cause skin ulcers to form on the skin because it can restrict blood flow, and if you aren't getting blood flow to tissues, you aren't getting oxygen delivery and nutrient delivery, so the tissue can die.
Can it kill you?
There are cases in the US where xylazine in combination with fentanyl has led to a massive increase in deaths in recent years. I think there's a New England Journal of Medicine article showing that deaths have increased from 2018, about 250 a year, to over 3,500 in 2021.
What then has to happen, do you think, about these vapes available here?
Well, I mean, ideally they wouldn't be available, but it's a type of street drug, and so that's going to be very difficult to control.
But I mean, if someone is listening to you, and indeed I'm sure people in government are listening to you and thinking, goodness, what do we do about this? How do we make sure that it doesn't become more widespread? Presumably the first thing is for people actually to know that potentially this particular vape, has it got a name? I mean, can people spot it and see that it might be dangerous?
So counterfeit vapes come in all different packages, shapes and sizes. I doubt that it's going to have a label on it that says, you know, this is a